podcast about linguistic discrimination.
I'm Megan Figueroa.
And I'm Carrie Gillen.
Hello over there.
Hello. So this has been going on for a while now, but this week it'll probably be passed. Quebec is probably going to approve Bill 96, which is a law that's supposed to protect the French language in the province. So it's basically a major reform of a bunch of different legislation that already exists. And there's already the Charter of the French Language.
Oh.
Yeah, which basically made French the most important language in Quebec. It was a way to protect French from English because it needed to be protected. English was everywhere and was like threatening to take over, even in Quebec. But at this point, it feels like, okay, that's done its job, and French seems pretty solid now in comparison. But it feels like now they're trying to increase French even more, and that has some effects on other people, right? Speakers of English or speakers of other languages.
In what way is it practically trying to protect, like, to make sure it's still on like government building? Like, isn't it everywhere anyway? Like, what are they trying to accomplish? What's being taken away?
Okay, so this bill will cap the number of students who can enter the English language colleges. Basically, they're kind of like a 1 year, well, at least they used to be. Maybe it's different now, but they used to be this 1 year college-ish thing that would bridge the gap between high school and university.
Okay. They would want to cap that.
They want to cap the number who are going to the English ones.
Huh. Oh, they have French ones too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the number of students in the English language cégeps can't be higher than it was in the school year before and cannot surpass 17.5% of the overall student population in Quebec. It's complicated, but basically, if you are actually an English speaker, like that's your first language, then there's a bunch of like exceptions. So you can learn French second language courses, so they just teach you how to speak and write in French. But if you're a speaker of any other language, then you have to take content courses in French at this English cégep. So you're basically in immersion for 3 of those courses.
Okay.
Which is hard.
Yeah.
And then if you're an English first language speaker, you don't have to take the French exam at the end of your cégep. But if you're a speaker of another language, then you do.
Okay. I see what they're trying to do. So this is complicated. I thought it would just be like so simple and straightforward. Like, no, it's okay. So French is fine. Like French as a global language is fine.
Right. And it was even at the time, right? But at the time in the 60s, it was threatened. And it made sense to create some legislation to protect it. Unfortunately, that had some knock-on effects on other languages that were not English.
Right.
Right. So many indigenous languages.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, it feels like French in Quebec is on a lot more solid ground than it was at the time when it first started trying to protect it.
Right.
And then there's healthcare issues.
Oh.
So government entities must, in an exemplary manner, use the French language, promote its quality, ensure its development in Quebec, and protect it. There is an exception where health, public safety, or the principles of natural justice so require, but there's also another section that says that a government agency cannot, quote, make systematic use of that other language. So, like, you're allowed to sometimes use English or another language, but you can't use it consistently, I guess.
And so all of this is meant to be done in French, mostly. But there are situations where it could be done in English, but you can't really be guaranteed that. Right.
They're claiming that everybody who wants to receive health services in English can receive it in English. If you're an English-speaking Quebecer or a recent immigrant or a tourist, you can receive it in English. So they're saying that nothing has changed. But the law, as it's written, makes that very unclear.
Yeah.
Functionally, my guess is since English has always been available in the healthcare system in Quebec, it's going to continue to be available.
Is there French sign language? And is that protected within the just French, this as well?
No, it's not the same language, so no. This law is not about that. It's only about French.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it only protects one language, and that is French. Right now, you have the right to seek justice in the courts in either English or French. That applies across the country. And apparently that they say that that's not going to change in Quebec, but they have changed one of the provisions for judges. So judges will no longer have to have a specific level of knowledge of a language other than the official language. So that means they might not have, your judge might not be an English speaker, or might not have enough English to give you a proper trial.
Without interpretation services.
Well, they could use interpretation services, but again, that's not less than ideal.
Yeah.
The best case is that the judge speaks the language that you speak.
Right.
If the French language and the justice ministers agree, they can say, okay, a judge has to be bilingual, but only if there's every other option has been exhausted. I don't know. This seems really complicated, and it seems like having a bilingual judge, an English-French bilingual judge, is no longer going to be the rule in Quebec.
And this is meant to protect French?
Mm-hmm.
Still.
Let's see. Okay, now Quebec has a language office, and they're going to be able to investigate businesses suspected of not operating in French.
Oh.
Before this bill, only businesses with 50 employees or more had to have a plan to ensure French was the common language of the workplace.
What? Wait.
This included having a French committee and a certificate from the government validating that the business's common language is French. But now it's going down to businesses with as few as 25 employees.
This is wild to me.
And employers will not be able to require knowledge of any other language other than French while hiring or promoting employees, which seems completely inappropriate for some jobs.
Yeah.
It seems a bit draconian.
Yeah. That's wild. That is wild.
Yeah. And constitutional experts are now concerned.
Yeah.
Like, what could happen when a business is suspected of, like, not being French enough?
Yes, that's my... Ideally, you would think that the law would be, like, opposite of what they're trying to do, like, to protect, like, equal protection under the law or whatever. That's...
Yeah, there's not equul protection. It's French above all else. And that's been the case since the 60s.
Shit.
And, yeah, we're just making it more so. And, at the beginning, like, it made sense to protect it against English. Of course, I still think they went a little too far in some ways because, like, there are other languages. It's not just English and French in this country.
Right.
As they know, but they pretend not to. So they've always had this ability to investigate, whether companies were not being French enough. But that power was always limited by the Canadian Charter, which protects Canadians from unreasonable search and seizure. But now, the Bill 96 invokes what's called the notwithstanding clause. Basically, it's it says, well, we're just going to ignore this part of the Canadian Charter because we're allowed to, because that was written into the Constitution.
Wow.
For complicated reasons. Anyways.
Right.
So, yeah, it's, not great.
Yeah. No, I'm just thinking about, it sounds like it's kind of similar there, but all the laws this would be in violation of in the US, but yeah, the search and seizure, the just equal protection under the law, and several amendments that we have, or, there's several ways to protect that. Not that always works out very well, especially for language in the US, but it seems like Quebec has it, so they're protecting French above all else, and they're doing a good job of it legally.
Yeah, the United States, it wouldn't even apply at all because there's no law on the book about language, right? Like, you can't force a company to work in any language.
You can't. People get around that.
No, but I'm saying the government can't impose English on a workplace.
Right. Well.
No, they can't. And they wouldn't try. At least maybe Trump would, maybe,
Right.
As it is now, no, there's no such thing. So the other group of people that this affects is any immigrants, any newcomers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So refugees and immigrants are allowed to get services in English or another language for 6 months after their arrival, and then after that, exclusively in French.
Nope. Who are these people? They're like, in 6 months, you will know enough, it doesn't matter.
Right. So if a government worker was helping someone whose language was, let's say, Italian, and they spoke Italian, so for the first 6 months, they could help them in Italian, and then at that 6-month mark, switch to French.
It's crazy.
Yeah, no, 6 months is definitely not enough time. I don't think it's appropriate ever to do this to a refugee or immigrant. But,
no, yeah.
I mean, it's hard enough that they have to choose between English or French. Generally speaking. I mean, in the rest of the country, depending on where you end up, there's probably some support for like most of the major languages of the world. So there's, probably something where you can, but in Quebec, you're just like, nah, after 6 months, it's just French. That's it. You're like, it's already hard enough to have to like learn French or English.
This is awful.
Yeah. So anyway, that's Quebec. The situation is complicated and yeah, it's a mess. And people are mad.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Complex.
Yep.
Our episode today, God, I love this conversation. I loved it so much.
Yeah, it's great. We talked all about Pentlatch, which is a Salish language, Coast Salish language, spoken on Vancouver Island. This episode is supported by Finding Five, the tech nonprofit that enables academic researchers to create and run online behavioral research studies in the cloud. www.finding5.com. So their platform is best suited for stimulus presentation types of studies that consist of hundreds of randomized trials per study. They are also a 501c3 nonprofit, so they listen to their users. They don't have any shareholders. Their mission is about trying to lower the technical barriers to transitioning into online experiments.
Researchers can be left to think about like research questions, like what are the best stimuli to present to get this, or, to test this kind of response, instead of like having to worry about like where they're going to host the study, if it's reliable enough, are they going to, you don't want to lose your data. So with something like Finding Five, it means that you have a reliable server and you don't have to worry about like losing precious data.
They also have their own study grammar for building the experiments. They use academic terms that are already familiar to researchers instead of using programming jargon.
They have really nice features like exclusion criteria, and coming up, they're going to have demographics filters.
It's also financially accessible because creating the studies is completely free. There's no feature restrictions to the study grammar. Even if you don't pay for a subscription, it's only when you start collecting data that you start having to pay, and it's considerably lower price than alternative solutions.
That low fee is just to maintain the operation of the nonprofit and not to make a profit.
There's a promotional code for listeners of the Vocal Fries. You get a 1-month pro subscription for free, and that comes with all the premium features and 100 free participants for that 1 month. And the US server is www.finding5.com, and the promotional code is FF-US-fries. And if you are not in the US or close to the US, you might want to use the EU server instead, and that is eu.finding5.com, and the promotional code is FF-EU-fries. And that expires on August 31st, 2022, midnight Eastern Daylight Time.
Try to create the study first and then redeem the code. Don't waste your code until you're ready to run something.
Yes. So have fun collecting data. All right, so today we're very excited to have the Working Pentlatch Revitalization team, and I'm introducing them in alphabetical order. Matthew Andrietta is a member of the Qualicum and Musqueam First Nations and an artist in 2D illustration and wood carvings. Jesse Rakelma is a member of the Qualicum First Nation and contemporary Coast Salish artist. Chief Michael Rakelma is the chief of Qualicum First Nation. And Dr. Stuart Panchik is a linguist at University of Victoria who's been studying the Salish and Wakashan languages spoken on Vancouver Island for many years. She's worked with several communities on Vancouver Island to support a number of their language revitalization projects. Her interests in linguistic theory and documentation relate to sound and word patterns, especially words that involve copying to express a new meaning, and was once one of my professors. So welcome, all of you.
Oh, hey, I'm so happy. I'm so excited to talk to artists too, by the way. I didn't realize that little bit about you all, so that's exciting.
Can you explain what the project you're all working on is? Maybe we can start with Chief Michael Rakelma.
My vision was to have the language revitalized or try to wake it up. And that was a few years ago. I think it was like 4 or 5 now. And it kind of started with a conversation with assistant deputy minister. And then we got seed funding. We being the band got seed funding from the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. And from there, we just continued on, hired people to work the team, to work with this revitalization project. And here we sit this many years later with the language being reawakened.
As an American, can someone explain I didn't get quite the whole title, but the reconciliation? What kind of funds, or is that a government, like a Canadian government thing?
It's the provincial government,
okay.
a wing of the provincial government.
Okay, and then you can apply for funds.
Yes, you can.
From them.
And
okay.
we did. We didn't know where we were going to go, but we started there.
Yeah,
okay.
The government here has, as sort of a gesture towards reconciliation, has been offering funds to help projects like ours. It's complicated because at the same time that funding was cut when we first got it too. Yeah, it's an interesting situation, but it is funding from the government to show that they're dedicated to a form of reconciliation.
Does it feel more like a gesture?
Yeah, it's kind of I think a bit of a loaded question, because what more would we want them to do? It's not like I would want any closer hands on the work that we're doing themselves anyways. And also, how can you undo what has been done anyways? So it becomes a question of, well, what do you want then?
Right.
That's a good place to ask this question. So,
yeah,
what is Pentlatch and where was it spoken?
Anyone want to field this one?
So, Pentlatch is a language that's considered to be in the northern Coast Salish dialect or region of the Coast Salish languages. And from what we know, it was spoken from about northernly around the Comox Valley in the harbor in Comox, down south towards Englishman River by Parksville. Sort of generally, our island's kind of divided by a central mountain range, so we kind of find ourselves at a border there, and then as well, sort of really overlapping with a lot of the Gulf Islands straight out from us, around Denman and Hornby and Lasqueti and Texada Islands as well.
You mentioned, as far as we know, or you said something to that effect. Is there history that's missing for you at this point about where it was spoken?
Yes, namely that really early on in contact, the majority of Pentlatch people had already died off through disease and warfare, and to a point where there's some areas that had a lot of empty villages just from those things, even before contact came around, because smallpox made its way up this way before European explorers came up. So there's definitely a lot of things we don't know, and unfortunately we can't pull that information back.
So besides the disease and the warfare, what else happened to Pentlatch?
Same thing that happened to most Indigenous communities all over the world. Forced assimilation, a degradation of how we were made to see ourselves as people and our languages and our cultures, and children being murdered for speaking their language in schools. There's a lot of contributing factors for why this language is now considered extinct by linguists. And it's it's a complicated history too, like Jesse was saying, because there was a lot of geographical movement around the island. People pushing into other territory, people moving from that territory, adopting different languages, that too. So I think, yeah, what happened was forced assimilation, and having the label slapped on by anthropologists in the 1800s as extinct, I think was a huge, and still is a huge issue, because when you have that label, no one's going to go looking for anything, right? Because they assume it's gone.
Yeah, so let's talk about extinct. So this is a word that people are starting to move away from and towards sleeping. And why is that? Why is this change happening?
I think, when we look at how do we define extinct, because we know dinosaurs are extinct because I don't see a velociraptor running by my window, but can we say Puntletch is extinct when I just said a Puntletch word the other day? Because that's definitely there's a definition of that coming from somewhere that's not us, because clearly we're not extinct. Because that's often another connotation that comes along with that definition of extinctness, is that they assume because the language is extinct, the people are as well. But we definitely can show that we have this Puntletch lineage, that we also still are able to use some of these words that our ancestors have used. Our community specifically was often overlooked linguistically, because in old census records they would note that we spoke Chinook, because there were so many other people who would often be visiting around that spoke different languages, that they wouldn't classify us as belonging to a specific language group. So they just sort of skip over, saying, "Oh, they only speak Chinook, so they don't have anything left."
Chinook jargon was a trade that existed in the area that a lot of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people spoke. They used aspects of our Indigenous languages as well as French and other borrowed terms and things like that.
Our Uncle Alfred apparently used to call it the white man's Indian language, as when it was used more by traders.
Now that your project is working to wake up Puntletch, so how are you doing that, and why is it important to do that?
Maybe just to go back and expand a little bit on what Jesse was talking about too, and your question around extinct and why that matters to undo that understanding. Our languages are so intertwined with the world around us and our understandings of our ways of being and relating to the world around us. And they inform each other and go back and forth. And those languages have been in place for thousands of years before contact. You can't exterminate that. But you can't completely eliminate a way of being, because, like Jesse was saying, we're still here. We breathe in Puntletch. We walk around like we're Puntletch people. You can't exterminate that. And I think that is an understanding that is hard for a lot of Western academic-oriented people have trouble understanding too, because our language is our culture, and our culture is us, and that's living. That's not something that you can kill. And so to label it as dead is a direct attempt at doing that as well. That for us is really important too. Hard to reverse. The opinions of professionals become facts in these cases oftentimes. So it's hard to reverse.
Especially if they're peer reviewed by peers who agree. Still moving on this topic too, connected with what Matt was saying, how we can't really accept the definition of extinct, is that, when we first got these materials of vocabularies of Puntletch, there's a lot of, when we see the words in the vocabulary list, my experience with other languages has shown me that a lot of these words are the same words that a lot of other languages have. And the thing about Puntletch as being a Coast Salish dialect or language, as linguists correct me to say, is that we share words with other Coast Salish languages. And so, when we have a one word that's the exact same word as spoken in another language, I think we have to recognize too, it's not so much that language owns that word, is that language speaks that word. And there's a lot of shared words amongst the Coast Salish languages and the Coast Salish subdialects. Can we like fully label something as being extinct if we're still having these words popping up elsewhere? It's just we don't have the like we have the pieces, but we don't have the puzzle picture. Kind of, we're getting a lot more of that puzzle picture now with working through a lot of our documents that we got from the APS and some that Matt was able to get from the University of Washington. All these different little puzzle pieces that are sort of helping us put things back together.
So what are these documents that you're using?
We've found that the only primary resources that we have of Pentlatch come from the early work of Franz Boas, and then some other not nearly as extensive work done by Homer Barnett in Homer Barnett's field notes. So Homer Barnett going around different Coast Salish communities in the late 20s, early 30s to write his book, The Coast Salish of British Columbia. One of his interviewees was supposed to be Joe Nimnim, but Joe Nimnim wouldn't talk to him. Joe Nimnim being a Pentlatch chief in around Comox. Joe Nimnim wouldn't talk to him, but his wife would. So she would share some of what she knows, and some of the stuff was more so on the Pentlatch line, but as well there was a heavy influence of the Ayajusam or the island Comox language, which she had spoke as originally. But Boaz himself was able to work with people in the 1890s in the Comox Valley with the Pentlatch language speakers. And then if Matt wants to talk a bit about the stuff that he dug up.
Yeah, my journey here kind of matched or was a little bit serendipitous with my Uncle Mike's and our chief Rakelma. In my first year of university, I did a year-long research project at UBC in the Department of the First Nations and Indigenous Studies program, as it was called at the time. And I did a full year-long project on Pentlatch people. When I was growing up, I was a little bit too proud, maybe. I started going around telling everyone that I'm Indigenous, I'm First Nations. And then people started asking more questions. So then I asked my mom more questions, and she told me when I was really young that we're Pentlatch. Never really knew what that meant entirely. And neither did anyone else when I told them. So come my first year of university, I did this research project, and what I found was all this label of extinct everything. It was really disheartening and hard to encounter because, again, to kind of chime on that note again, you have to understand why that claim is made. And that's to extinguish any claim that we have of existence. Basically, to reject that is of the utmost importance for our project. But in that first year, my research skills were pretty limited, so I didn't really find much other than that. Until my final year, when I was in a First Nations and Endangered Languages course. This was around the same time as Uncle Mike started having his dream and talking with people about revitalizing this language. So I did a semester project in that course. You could choose any language you wanted, just research it and be in relation with it, basically, was the goal of that project. So I finally I chose to revisit Pentlatch, and with new research skills and a little bit more experience. And doing that led me to find in the archives at the University of Washington in Seattle, a linguist named Dale M. Kincaid worked closely with Boaz's materials. Found on their website in their archives that they had a pretty decent amount of Pentlatch materials. But it was pretty unclear until we get there, of course. So another cousin of ours came with me to Seattle, and we went, and they brought out just these very large boxes that were just full of our language. And I saw that coming. It was incredibly humbling and emotional to sit there and in the basement of some building in Seattle to find a piece of ourselves, to start getting into relation with it again. So then I knew that we had to bring it back. We don't have it all still, but we had to pay out of pocket. And after that, I knew that I had to talk to Uncle Mike And we had to decide what to do with these documents and what can be done. And that's when our work all started. It was off of those. I think we brought back around 300 to 400 pages or so of Dale Kincaid's work. And yeah, that was all his studies on Boaz's documentations on the language. And our language was one of the first ones that he had encountered when he came here too. So
he was actually my very first linguistics professor.
Oh.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
I'm just like getting generations wrong because I thought that he would have not been still teaching at that point. But
he was close to retirement by the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing story. And I'm glad that you were able to get most of the materials, and I hope you get all of the materials. And I'm sorry that you had to pay for it because that's not fair.
It makes me think of how museums and other places are places of violence, and white people do not understand that in the same way. That's horrifying that you had to pay for it.
It's a funny situation. Wear these gloves. Don't cough. Don't touch anything.
Right. Yeah.
I mostly wanted to share that because, again, it's the language woke up by itself. And it started calling to our chief and our Uncle Mike, and now here we are with it.
Yeah, Chief Michael, what is your relationship with the language? Did your parents speak it at all?
Did not. My great uncle did, as Jesse had referred to. And my brother remembers more about the language than I do, because he spent a lot of time with Uncle Alfred. So that's my tie to it. What I heard from Billy was what I did, which was not very much.
Okay, yeah. So what else are you doing on this project to wake Pentlatch up?
I know that one of our questions is what languages are related to Pentlatch, so maybe this could be a good comparison work and stuff.
Yeah. So in terms of obtaining resources, we definitely had a much more positive experience with Brian Carpenter at the American Philosophical Association, or Society, Philadelphia. So when I first got copies of the Boaz papers, the documents, I would look through. I just look through it. Like I was definitely did not have the linguistic skills that I have now, but I did have some familiarity with language and Coast Salish languages just from my general experience. And I definitely noticed a lot of words that were very similar to words that I did know. And sort of my intuition was sort of suggesting that, okay, so if so many of these Coast Salish languages are so similar in different ways, maybe I should look at our linguistic neighbors, namely like the Comox languages, Iajutham and Iajusam. I had some knowledge of Iajutham, the mainland Comox language. At that point, I didn't know where to start to look up for anything relating to Seashelt, but I also did have some familiarity with Halkometnam as well, which are sort of all around in the Coast Salish language family. Some of the stuff that I found too was some work done by Boaz that had included a comparative language graph that looked at there's quite a number of Salish languages that had Lekwungen, the Nanaimo dialect of Halkometnam, Seashelt, Squamish, Pentlatch, Comox, Bellicula, and a couple of the interior Salish languages. And so I would look at the English words that were on the left hand column, and then go across the board and see which words were similar to the Pentlatch word in the Pentlatch column. And then I'd go and I'd see if I could find the Halkometnam word in the contemporary Halkometnam dictionary to see if there was still some similarity there, and then that would kind of give me an idea of how to more accurately pronounce the word that Boaz had written down. And it's definitely been really, really exciting journey to piece together everything that we've had and try to do our best to decode Boaz's orthography, because he was doing everything at such an early point in time in his career, and he was doing things at a point in time where there was no real standard orthography for indigenous languages on the West Coast. And so he had his really bizarre ways of interpreting certain sounds that I got to a point where, okay, I'm gonna have to interpret what he's reading and hope for kind of hope for the best if I can't find like a similar word in another language. My work has been largely comparative in terms of finding the similarities between Pentlatch words and other words, and for the most part, I'd say it's been fairly successful.
Yeah, and our community was able also through this work to hire Sue and Sarah Kell, very talented linguists that we're so happy to have helping us with this language and helping us understand it and looking at all these different pieces of the puzzle, like Jesse was saying too, and being able to see where they might be able to fit. But Sue might be able to speak a little bit more to your question as well.
Yeah, I was just going to bring her in.
Yeah, so I mean, what Jesse's been doing has, basically been doing this comparative work. The work material that Dale Kincaid did as well was he tried to have a representation of what Boaz had, and then he looked up all of the other like cognates in the neighboring languages, so trying to check things that way. So, but basically what we're trying to do is, having as accurate representation of how Boaz transcribed it using a couple of different systems depending on where, if it's the English Pentlatch or the Pentlatch German, right? So he used slightly different systems. So we're trying to have accurate representation of that and then map that to like a close phonetic transcription, which is like exactly how he heard it. So how he heard it with his German ears, where he hadn't really written any other indigenous languages, and then trying to figure out, but through the comparative work, is that a popped sound? It is in Ayatusum, so likely is in Pentlatch. So getting the pronunciation that way, and then right now we're excited about having interim orthography that we're going to introduce soon. And then by then we'll be able to figure out what are the pronunciation rules and things like that. So, and this is all part of a larger grant. There's First Peoples Cultural Council has language revitalization and planning projects. So I've been able to jump on board with that funding, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity. Mostly it's just kind of like, yeah, Jesse, that's right. Because he's really figured out a lot.
Yeah, I think there's something else that Jesse had said previously too. You almost have to learn 5 other languages to start to learn this one. And that's just an unfortunate reality that he's been running into and really working hard through to make it the case that our community members don't have to do that and making it accessible for them, because that's really a major priority for our project and for the work that we're doing, is transmitting this language and communicating it to our community and allowing them to also have these pieces to look at them and try to understand them and where they fit within them and where those pieces fit inside of them too. So another major part of our work is community engagement. And again, like Sue mentioned, the orthography, there's a lot of decisions made in those conversations that were meant to prioritize our community members and the accessibility to the language as well. That were really important for us because, again, if we're going to undo those understandings, it has to be as non-intimidating and as approachable as it can be for everyone, because we all have different relationships with different languages too, because not everyone is a Pentlatch descendant in Qualicum. It seems like there's an artful science that goes into the reconstruction work because we don't actually know what this language sounded like as well. And that's kind of something that I've been witnessing Jesse take part in, is a discerning, creative, scientific approach that I've found really interesting so far.
Jesse, are you learning, working with German too, to kind of feel like how he may have heard things or how he may have perceived things?
One of the things I did last year was, okay, so Boaz in his Pentlatch materials, he has 2 sets of almost like separate works in there. He has his English to Pentlatch vocabulary list, and then he also has his German to Pentlatch vocabulary list. They both have different the German Pentlatch has more words on it than the English Pentlatch one. So one of my tasks that I jumped onto was to translate the German Pentlatch one, because when you go through the German word list, he has different interpret the translations differently than he has interpreted himself. So I definitely had to work with quite a bit of German to start to interpret that whole word list. Like at some point, he was calling like herons cranes, cougars are being referred to as panthers, and there's just like there's been a number of things that we would have a word for. We have a word for in English now, but didn't have like a German equivalent. So he kind of I believe German's famous for making up words. In my philosophy studies, I read a lot of German philosophers that made up their own words, and I figured if they can, so can we. Yeah, definitely German is one of the languages I had to work a lot with to understand Boaz's work, because his ears hear things differently than ours, but also the way the way his ears would hear some sounds made it easier than if an English linguist would be working with this language that didn't have proper knowledge of all the different sounds. Because say when I compare, say the work of I believe it was George Dawson did a comparative word list of Comox, Nanaimo, and I forget which other language, but the way that he would write down his interpretations was nowhere near as accurate as Boaz's at similar points in time. So Boaz's work is definitely not perfect, but it's definitely something still workable. There's less guesswork, but still lots of guesswork.
So how can people outside of the community support the Pentlatch revitalization efforts?
I think that can be a tough question, like especially when we're in such early stages of our language work. I don't know if Uncle Mike's got some thoughts on that.
I don't know how they could really. Jesse's quite right. Once we get further into this, then the support can come from reading materials, etc. But up until then, this is such a. When I say we, I mean Jesse and Matt are so early in this work that it's really hard to say how people could support us. When the time comes for stories being written in the language, it'll be different then, but that's not there yet.
I wonder if any linguists that happen to have materials for certain, like, who knows? Send it along.
that or maybe University of Washington could sort of help us get those materials quicker, or I think the APS has sort of really done the most they could at this point. They've been more than helpful with the materials they provided for us that can help.
Well, I'm pretty sure at least one of our supporters is at the University of Washington, so maybe if they're listening.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to let our listeners know about this project, or about Pentlatch, or anything?
Or where we can buy your wood carvings and art?
I think our community's situation is incredibly interesting and difficult, but incredibly important, I think, for all of us, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, to consider and look at and really interrogate ourselves about. Like, why is this situation here? Like, why do we have to do these things to be able to relate to ourselves and each other and understand ourselves as Indigenous people? And what comes with that understanding, that's one of the beginnings of reconciliation. And that's when people would then be able to offer assistance from the outside in a better way. Because if people don't understand that and the reasonings for our language not being with us anymore, what they have to offer this type of work and these conversations will be very limited as well. In the last year or so, Canadians and the whole world in general have been learning more in depth about the atrocities that happened here and continue to happen here, in order for us not to have this language anymore. understanding that along with this work, I think, sorry, I'm rambling now. It's emotional because it's hard to talk about. And I've found, even speaking in front of community, every single time I do for this project, I get choked up as well. But in this year where, again, people have been seeing these atrocities laid bare, they need to look at this project and understand that this is the same thing. This is a direct product of those atrocities. And if you're going to walk around wearing an orange shirt or touting yourself as an ally, then you need to also understand this project and the impacts that it has on us and our community as well.
So for people who are not Canadians, they might not know what the orange shirt is. Could someone explain that?
Yeah, so residential schools, they had them in the States as well, but I think they were more called boarding schools. But,
industrial schools.
Yeah. They're educational establishments that were set up by the government and run by the churches to kill the Indian to save the man, basically. They were meant to eliminate our culture and target our children and any sort of transference of traditional knowledge, language, practice, ceremony, and traditional ways of being for extinction. And again, that's why that label is on our language to this day, is to eliminate our claim to territory as well. In Canada, there's a story. You can look up the orange shirts, and that will tell you the story better than I can.
There was a young girl going to residential school, and she was wearing, she wore her orange shirt as she was going to residential school that she had just got. She just got her shirt. And when she was there, they made her strip down, and they took away all her clothes, and then they made her wear a uniform. Her name is Phyllis Webstad. She had always sort of hoped that like, you know, when she would leave, she'd get her orange shirt back, but she never got it back. And so she shared this story of hers at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Vancouver, and so there started to be calls for people to on September 30th to wear orange shirts in sort of recognition of the work that or of that experience she had. And so since then, it's sort of been the happening that people would wear their orange shirts on September 30th in memory of that. So she's still alive, she's still around, and she's gained a lot of support from that so far. And so that's why on September 30th we wear our orange shirts.
Thank you. Yeah, I know it's a lot to unpack, but you know, most of our listeners are in the States, and we also have listeners elsewhere, so they wouldn't necessarily have this background. Any other last words for our listeners before we let you go?
I just want to say that Matt is sorry, there's my cat there. Matt has an incredibly unique take on Coast Salish art, but he has yet to start himself an Instagram art page yet. But I'm hoping that after we have our art show coming up, that he will start to advertise more of his art and put himself out there a bit, because he's definitely got a unique style. And when he does, you definitely have to look up the Matt Andrietta art page when it comes out.
I can't wait.
Oh yeah,
under construction.
As soon as we have that, we'll put it up.
We'll share it too.
Definitely share it.
Jesse's already got one, so you can put that one up now.
Oh,
yeah. Thank you for sharing your stories and for sharing your art. And
yeah, I know it's anytime we talk about language, it always ends up being emotional for a variety of reasons that, you know, it's just so much trauma around it. Mm-hmm. And I'm grateful that you were willing to share this project with us. So I think it's really important. People don't necessarily understand language reclamation, or understand why, using the word extinct is bad. And so I think this was a really helpful conversation. So thank you very much for coming. We always leave our listeners with one final message. Don't be an asshole.
Don't be an asshole.
All right, so this month we would like to thank Christine Gu for becoming a patron.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I love our patrons.
Yeah, me too. She's our 100th patron.
Hey, that's cool.
Yes.
That's awesome. We just had our 100th episode and now we have a 100th patron. That's good.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And yeah, so if you want to become a patron, you can go to www.patreon.com/vocalfriespod, and we have stickers and we have bonus episodes and we have mugs.
Yeah. Bonus episodes are fun.
Yes, they are. Very salty.
Yes. So lots and lots of backlog. All still relevant.
That's true. Let me see how many we have. It's a
lot.
We have 52, about to have 53 bonus episodes. So yeah, it's a lot to listen to.
It's awesome.
The Vocal Fries podcast is produced by me, Carrie Gillen, for Halftone Audio. Theme music by Nick Granum. You can find us on Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Vocal Fries Pod. You can email us at vocalfriespod@gmail.com, and our website is vocalfriespod.com.